house out at Fairmount Avenue. It was known as Lakewood Road in those days. He built in 1927. As far as they plowed was the top of the hill past our house,
Mm-hmm.
where the nursing home is now,
Right.
you know. And so he was as far out in the country as he could get. And of course, Jackson was a neighbor. And I told you Jackson had a barn and horses and pasture and so on, and loved horses. And this was a little problem for my sister June, who used to get in sometimes at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And Jackson every morning went riding his horses at dawn.
Oh, kidding.
And she tried very hard to avoid him. The boyfriend had let her off the block from the house. She tried to sneak into the house. Here was Jackson. Good morning, June. And of course, she was trying to to avoid him, you know. The barn was struck by lightning finally and burned up, and my brothers ran over and tried to help get the horses out. And Jackson had 2 kids, Bill and Mary, who were older than I and just a little bit younger than June. And Bill used to call June all the time to go out ringing doorbells. You know how that works?
Yeah, yeah.
And the Cotters lived across the street from his 4 ladies, and they were always giving us a hard time and kidding, you know, very friendly, but always. And they were a natural target. So when Bill would call, June would say, okay, and they'd go and start on Cotter. You ring the doorbell, and they come to the door, you're hiding in the bushes. Then you sneak up and ring again, and now they're waiting right inside the door, you know. And as soon as you ring the bell, they open the door, and you have to get away quick. So, anyway, one time, Billy invited June to come over and meet the governor, who was going to stay overnight at their house. June was all excited and came home. Told my father she was going to meet the governor. He said I wouldn't cross the street to meet him. My father was a rock-rid Republican, as a Dick Reedy, you know. He wouldn't walk across the street. But in 1932, when Roosevelt ran for president, June got a Hoover sign and put it on the front porch of Jackson's house. She said it's set back from the road, and she had to sneak up there, and there's a great big window went all the way to the floor, you know, and she put the sign and got out of there. And on election night, when it was apparent that Roosevelt was winning by a landslide, Jackson came to our house and rang the bell and came in and asked for June. He was laughing, and he brought the Hoover sign back. Told her to put it up in the attic with all the other antiques. She never figured out how he knew she put it there, but she was the obvious one in the neighborhood to suspect.
That's beautiful.
There was a proposal to annex Sumner and make it a part of Jamestown, West Ellicott. Of course, Ivy Squire was very much in favor of this, and the property owners along Lakewood Road were against it, and Jackson was their spokesman, and he debated as Ivy Squire in the Sutherland School on this, which was a very colorful debate. Old Ivy was pounding his cane on the floor, and Jackson was saying, "What's that, Ivy? I can't hear you, Ivy," you know, and making fun of him. One of the more colorful debates, I think, that Jackson had, and the proposal, of course, was turned down. Jackson was a successful lawyer, you know, in New York, in Jamestown for many years.
Yeah.
Tried many cases up in Mayville, was well known as a trial lawyer and very successful, and represented many of the businesses in Jamestown. When my father graduated from medical school in 1910, he looked at where he was going to locate in New York State. He looked at a city downstate about the same size, and General Electric had a big plant there, and that was virtually the only industry. Jamestown at that time had 300 small factories, locally owned, and that's why he came here.
Wow.
You know, you must remember the furniture factories, the metal factories, automatic voting machine, modern Rockwell, of course, and
Blackstone, that'll.
Blackstone, yeah, Crescent Tool, Hope's Windows, Dahlstrom's,
Yeah.
and what was the biggest one in town? Up there, it had 4 plants in town, manufactured Art Metal.
Art Metal, absolutely.
Yeah, and then, so anyway, that's why he came here. And
How many kids were there? How many Goodell children?
6, I was
6.
one of 6. Yeah.
1 or 6. And who are they? Who are they?
Well, my oldest was Fran. She married Bert Rappel. He was a
Okay.
doctor in Jamestown. And then Jim, he was a doctor in Jamestown. And then George was an accountant here. And then June, and then myself, and then Charles was the youngest. So, the story about Jackson that I recall was when he represented Jamestown Telephone Company. John Wright was the owner, locally owned. And apparently they had a contract that was expiring with New York Telephone. And Jackson, and it was to expire at midnight, and so Jackson went down there and held all the outgoing calls from Jamestown until the first call came in from New York Telephone, and they accepted that, which he argued later renewed the contract. It was an offer by New York Telephone accepted by Jamestown, and he successfully argued that renewed the contract on former terms, you know.
Think about holding up all the calls.
Oh yeah, no calls going out after midnight until one came in, and then grab that one, and that's it.
Power play.
Yeah. When Charles finished law school, he went to an American Bar Association meeting in Boston where Jackson spoke and urged young lawyers to go into government service. So Charles tried to get a job in Washington unsuccessfully, and called Jackson and told him that, and Jackson called Herb Brownell, who was the Attorney General. Charles then was assistant to Bill Rogers, who was assistant to Herb Brownell, who was the Attorney General. While Charles was in Washington, Jackson invited him to a Sunday supper with the Chief Justice. So Charles went out there, and he was impressed with the fact that when they went into this informal Sunday supper, the Chief Justice still had to come in and be seated first before anybody else could sit down. And even Warren, who wasn't that, fussy as far as that goes. And Warren's daughter wanted to leave early, and Charles took her home in his beat-up old Ford coupe, which she remembered. Charles, as you know, later became a senator, a congressman, and a senator. Did you know that Hillary Clinton worked in Charles's office when he was a congressman?
No.
Yeah, she was an intern.
I'll be darned.
So she has some experience in New York politics, although I haven't heard her mention in any of her campaign that she worked for a Republican congressman.
Never.
Which she did, yeah.
That's interesting.